Is Israel punishing prisoners on strike? Jailed Palestinians refuse food to demand more humane treatment. Is it just a peaceful protest or something more? Also on today's program, using aid as a weapon in Yemen. As millions of people face starvation, the UN appeals to the government and the Houthis. We speak to both sides in the conflict. I'm Imran Garda, and this is the Newsmakers. He's seen as a potential Palestinian president, but he's serving 5 life sentences in an Israeli prison. Now, Marwan Barghouti is leading a hunger strike by about 1,000 Palestinian inmates. In an opinion piece published in the New York Times last week, Barghouti said they're drinking only water with salt to protest what they call arbitrary arrests and inhumane treatment. Since then, Israeli prison officials have cracked down on the detainees, confiscating personal items and transferring some prisoners into solitary confinement. Israel denies any wrongdoing and dismisses the strike as a political ploy. In the past, Barghouti has called for a third intifada, and now Fatah, the ruling party in the occupied West Bank, has called for a day of rage on Friday. So is the strike just a peaceful protest or a way to revive resistance behind bars? Today's newsmakers are the Palestinian hunger strikers in prison. And we begin with this report from Randolph Nogel.
أنا أدعو الشعب الفلسطيني العظيم إلى الوحدة وإلى التلاحم وإلى إقامة حكومة وحدة وطنية وإلى الاستمرار في المقاومة الشعبية السلمية من أجل إنهاء الاحتلال.
When Palestinian leader Marwan Barghouti was given 5 life sentences in 2004, he was going to a place where, in many Palestinians' minds, heroes are born. At that time, he was already one of the most popular leaders among his people. Many Israelis consider him a terrorist for his role in the Second Intifada, the Palestinian uprising against Israel between 2000 and 2005. Since being imprisoned, he has called for a third intifada. But now he has taken nonviolent resistance against Israel, a hunger strike. More than 1,000 of his fellow inmates have joined him. It's in protest of what they say is Israel's systemic abuse of Palestinian people through its prison system. Barghouti's health has reportedly declined over the last week. He's been placed in solitary confinement. And there are now fears that if any of those on hunger strike die, it will stoke the fires of a conflict that could boil over at any time. The hunger strike and the alleged systemic injustice it's intended to highlight have been met with indifference by many Israelis. Last week, a hardline group gathered outside the prison where Barghouti is being held, in an apparent attempt to taunt him and others refusing food.
אני זוכר את פניו של ברגותי בשנות ה-90 זועפות, שמחות וצוהלות אחרי פיגועים רבים. וטוב להם שישבתו רעב עד כמה עד מתי שירצו. לנו זה לא מפריע.
Prison hunger strikes are not a new phenomenon among the Palestinian resistance movement. But never before have so many inmates taken part. There are currently 6,500 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. 500 of them are being held under Israel's administrative detention law, something which allows imprisonment without a criminal charge. Human rights groups say that more than 800,000 Palestinians have been imprisoned or detained by Israel, evidence they say of a justice system stacked against Palestinians, and one which is part and parcel of systemic violence that has made resistance the inheritance of each passing Palestinian generation. Randolph Nogel, the Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Ramallah by Noura Audeh. She is a former spokeswoman for the Palestinian Authority. And in New York, Alan Dershowitz. He's a defense attorney and the author of The Case for Israel. Thanks, both of you, for joining us. Noor, this Palestinian prisoner hunger strike, is it the right thing to do?
Of course, it's the right thing to do. It is the most peaceful step the detainees and their families can engage in, and it's one more way the Palestinians are trying to make their case for human rights under this occupation. The fact that it's being met with not just indifference, but hostility from Israeli prison authorities is not surprising, but it should not meet the same kind of reaction from the international community as we've seen before, because the abuses have been well documented. International organizations are very clear on where Israel stands as far as breaches of human rights and international law in relation to Palestinian prisoners. And this mass hunger strike is one way of exposing that and of putting the issue of Israel's mass incarceration policy on the table and up for discussion.
Professor Dershowitz, the man at the center of this, Marwan Barghouti, he's seen as a Mandela figure by many Palestinians. How do you see him?
Well, I represented Nelson Mandela and worked with the ANC to end apartheid in South Africa. Barghouti is no Mandela. He was convicted after a fair trial of more than 4 murders of innocent people. The Israeli legal system that tried him has Muslim judges, Christian judges, Arab judges, women judges. That same Israeli system has put its own former prime minister in prison. If Barghouti had been convicted in any other Middle East country of these crimes, he'd have been executed. Compare the Israeli legal system, for example, to the Turkish legal system. Turkey has thousands and thousands of political prisoners, judges and lawyers, with not even a semblance of fair trial. Israel has the fairest judicial system of any country in the Middle East. They talk about a 90% conviction rate. The United States has a 92% conviction rate. You want a high conviction rate. That means that innocent people are not being brought to trial,
right.
That the vast majority of people who are brought to trial have in fact been found guilty. So we have to look at the big picture, and the big picture is that the Israeli legal system is fairer than any legal system in the Middle East.
Okay.
So we ought to see hunger strikes.
Can I jump in here for a second?
Strikes in Jordan and in Egypt, but not in Israel.
Okay. And if I could jump in here for a second, you heard about the 500 or so Palestinians in administrative detention in Randolph's report there.
Right.
Amnesty International just a few days ago, Professor Dershowitz, saying, quote, Israel's decades-long policy of detaining Palestinians from the occupied West Bank and Gaza in prisons inside Israel and depriving them of regular family visits is not only cruel, but also a blatant violation of international law. Their words, not mine. Your response, sir?
Well, Amnesty International has shown incredible bias against Israel over the years. I wrote an article against administrative detention back in 1970. Israel has 500 detainees. Turkey has 30,000 detainees. Let's use priorities. Let's focus on the countries that have the worst human rights records. Every country in the Middle East uses administrative detention to a far greater extent than Israel. Egypt has administratively detained without trial so many people, including their own former leader. So let's focus on where the worst abuses occur, and the least worst abuses occur in Israel. Israel has a legal system. They have open media.
Sure.
You can criticize the prime minister. You can't do that in Turkey today.
Okay, so Noor, let's talk about Turkey and Egypt rather than Israel. Let's not talk about the Palestinians.
Let's talk about everybody.
Well, you know, one way of running away from discussing the issues is to deflect attention. So I will jump back to the issue at hand. The fact is, Palestinians are tried in Israeli military courts, not in civilian courts. They are not awarded the same due process Israelis are awarded. The fact that Marwan Barghouti was tried inside Israel in a civilian court, it was an anomaly. Marwan Barghouti, who was an elected parliamentarian at the time of his illegal detention, refused to recognize the legitimacy of the court, and that was his right, and it was the right thing to do. And so he did not engage in a defense in an illegitimate court as far as he was concerned and the rest of the Palestinians was concerned.
Noor, that was a good point, wasn't it? He was convicted of killing people.
Noor,
he was convicted of killing people. Shouldn't we take that into account?
I allowed you to speak and make your points. I allowed you to deflect attention and run away from the issue. Allow me to state my point. The Israeli system has all the safeguards that you can think of for Israeli citizens. We're talking about the Palestinian population that is under Israeli military occupation. Palestinian children, Palestinian parliamentarians, Palestinian journalists are tried in Israeli military courts. And that conviction rate is not a sign of efficiency. It is a sign that reiterates the fact that this system, and really, I think it's a mockery to call it a justice system, is part of the occupation regime.
Right.
It is part of the machine
Noor, if I could ask
that
you,
has suppressed the Palestinian people
Noor,
and
if I
kept
could
them
ask
under
you a final
occupation
question
for
before I get a
50
final...
years. 800,000 Palestinians have gone through
Noor.
these Israeli prisons.
We're running out of time, Noor, so let me ask you a final question. You have Fatah calling for a day of rage on Friday. And in the recent past, Fatah has lost ground to Hamas, especially when it comes to the street. Isn't this a little bit opportunistic for Fatah as they're trying to rekindle their support on the street, calling for a day of rage? Isn't it a little opportunistic and irresponsible from Fatah, Noor?
Well, the issue of prisoners is an issue of national consensus in Palestine. Palestinians unite when it comes to supporting these prisoners. The fact that Fatah is calling for this day is only natural because an elected member of its central committee is leading this mass strike and in demand of those rights that you spoke about, which are basic rights that we're talking about. To hold Israel to a lower threshold, to a lower standard than it claims to hold itself to is hypocritical. It is giving Israel an easy way out,
right.
a ticket out of accountability, and that is simply unacceptable.
Okay, sorry to jump in
deny
here.
Palestinian families the right to see their loved ones, even if they're inside prison, that is inhumane. To hold them indefinitely is unacceptable.
Fair enough, Noor. Final word from Alan Dershowitz. Professor Dershowitz, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, she's speaking from Ramallah. There is not a single Israeli soldier in Ramallah, not a single Israeli policeman. I've been there many times. It is not an occupied city. It is what the future of Palestine could look like if the Palestinians would only come to the bargaining table.
Under international law, it is, sir. Please do not misstate the facts.
A two-state solution, which is what the Israelis have offered and what the United States wants and what most Palestinians and most Israelis want. So let's sit down and negotiate a two-state solution, which I think will help solve the problems. And then the Palestinians can have their own legal system. Better than the current legal system in which people are thrown off roofs and murdered.
We do have our own legal system. Palestinians have their own legal system, sir.
Oh boy, you call that a legal system? They murder people who are dissidents. Look what happened in Gaza. So many Palestinians were murdered by Hamas because they were dissidents. Look what happens in most other countries in the Middle East, including Turkey.
Why are you mixing apples and oranges? Are you so out of ideas you can't defend?
The Turkish people would be very, very happy.
Okay.
You're really, I mean,
okay, that's a good point at which to stop this.
I'm glad that deflecting is your way.
Okay, Noor and Professor Dershowitz, it's been good to have you both on the program. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thanks so much. The United Nations is urging the international community to come to the rescue of the people in Yemen. They're appealing for $2 billion in aid at a conference in Geneva to try and end the crisis. The war between Houthi rebels linked to Iran and a coalition backed by Saudi Arabia has driven the country into chaos. Aid agencies warn that if rival sides don't allow them to reach people in need, the population faces decimation. Shoaib Hassan reports.
The closure of the port of Hudaydah is a crime against the Yemeni people and against humanity all over the world.
Cry for help from people facing starvation. They're already caught between the hammer and the anvil. Airstrikes by Saudi jets targeting Houthi rebels have flattened much of Hudaydah and killed hundreds of people. The Saudis and their allies have now besieged the port city. They say it's to prevent Iran from supplying weapons to the Houthis. The UN says the siege is also preventing food from reaching millions and will result in a humanitarian catastrophe if not lifted.
We continue to advocate to the Saudi-led coalition that the attack on the port of Hudaydah and the city itself is not necessary. We need this as a lifeline for our work as humanitarians.
But the UN says the Houthis are also responsible for the deteriorating conditions. They've been accused of confiscating aid shipments for their own militias or to be sold on the black market. All that as one of the world's most underreported conflicts continues unabated. Yemen's civil war has claimed over 10,000 lives since it began in 2015. Shia Houthi rebels, backed by Iran and allied to the former President Ali Akbar Saleh, are fighting a Saudi-led coalition that supports the current president, Abdul Rabb Mansour Hadi. They control the west and south, while the Houthis hold sway over the east and north. It's part of Iran and Saudi Arabia's struggle for supremacy in the Middle East that's also prolonged conflicts in Syria and Iraq. Iran currently holds the upper hand, but the new administration in Washington says it wants to change that.
The Trump administration has no intention of passing the buck to a future administration on Iran. The evidence is clear. Iran's provocative actions threaten the United States, the region, and the world.
That seems to have emboldened the Saudi-led coalition to press ahead towards Hodeidah. That's where the Houthis are dug in and waiting. Aid agencies say the fighting will shut down the port for weeks, leaving millions to starve. And these children could be among them. Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from New York is Yemen's ambassador to the UN, His Excellency Khalid Hussein Al-Yemeni. Sir, thank you very much for joining us. This war continues to rage on. Who is to blame? Is it the Houthis?
Of course. This is a country that has achieved a lot of successes after the passing of former president, after the Yemeni people managed through a revolution to topple the former President Saleh from power through the GCC initiative, if you might remember. And we achieved so far a lot of positive results in the foundation of the modern state, the federal state that we envisage through the outcome of the national dialogue, through the preparation of the new constitution. We were almost ready to go for general elections. Then the Houthis, in alliance with Saleh and instigated by Iran, they took over the country by force, the style of Hezbollah, or the style of the attempt of the Hizmet movement of Gulen in Turkey.
Now, there was just a recent report from Human Rights Watch saying that the Houthis have been using landmines and killing civilians in the country, and this is well documented, so it's clear that civilians are dying at the hands of the Houthis. Now, the same human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, and others, show that the Saudi-led coalition is killing civilians as well, and the vast majority of the 10,000 or so people who have been killed in this war have been killed by the Saudi-led coalition. So when I ask about blame, isn't the government and the Saudi-led coalition also to blame for this war continuing to rage on?
It's quite difficult to assist this way. The situation in Yemen has been provoked through the coup taken taking the country by force, kidnapping the country by force by the Houthis, Saleh and they are proxies of Iran in Yemen. As you know, we know that war is an awful issue. Nobody consider war is a piece is a message of peace. War is war, but the war was a necessity because this is the only way to recover peace and tranquility and to recover the establishment. Because this is something that we cannot accept in Yemen, that a Hezbollah-style militia can take over Yemen and dictate the future of this nation. We know that there is also sometimes collateral damage through the air operations. We know that we commit mistakes sometimes here and there, but let me tell you that the huge amount of attacks and casualties and the landmines infested the country everywhere.
Yeah, now I agree with you, and I understand full well that the Houthis are responsible for many civilian deaths, but those same human rights organizations, as I say that the Saudi-led coalition is responsible for the vast majority of those 10,000, more than 10,000 deaths. There are 3 million people displaced. Let me ask you about strategy. Clearly, it's not working. So the Saudi-led coalition is backing your government of President Hadi, trying to defeat the Houthis, but it's not working. 2/3 of the population is reliant on food aid. Thousands have died. Isn't there a better way to do this? Will you talk to the Houthis?
Yep, we are talking to the Houthis, and we are willing to talk. And we went to Kuwait, especially to that. We spent 3 months in Kuwait talking to the Houthis. And at the end, when we had an agreement prepared to sign, they refused to sign the agreement. Putting a lot of emphasis on the famine is a political issue, because they use this concept
but sir, I mean, people are starving. 2/3, as I said, 2/3 of the population are reliant on food aid. It might not just be political. It might be that people are worried that Yemenis are starving to death. No more, no less.
No. We are talking about 80% of the country liberated, which means that there is 80% of the country with lesser humanitarian pressure. We know that the country is in humanitarian need. We know that we need to move to scale up our humanitarian operations, and this is what we are doing. But let me tell you that we are working with the UN, working with the coalition, so that our people have better humanitarian assistance in this situation. But we will defeat the Houthis. We will not let them kidnap our country, kidnap our people, and use the grievances of our people to empower themselves.
Thank you, Ambassador Khalid Hussein Al-Yemeni. Now, to get the other side of the story, we're joined by Hussein Al-Bukhaiti from Sana'a. He's a Yemeni journalist who's been following the war closely. Sir, thanks so much for joining us. You heard that interview with the ambassador. He blames the Houthis first and foremost, fundamentally. Who do you blame?
Actually, I blame the intervention of the Saudi-led coalition because the Houthi, either you agree with them or you don't, they are Yemenis. And for Mr. Yemeni to say that they have kidnapped the country, the one who have kidnapped the country and has sent the country into chaos is the Saudi-led coalition. Because when Houthi seized like the government in 21st of September 2014, this was 6 months before the war. There was no starvation. There wasn't any of the crisis we have in now.
Sure. Somebody who's also a Yemeni is President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi. He's a Yemeni. He was the president of a sovereign state, and he was kicked out. He was kicked out by the Houthis in an intervention. Doesn't he have a right to his country? Wasn't he a legitimate ruler of his country?
President Hadi, the former president, as I call him, he have resigned. And then after 2 months, and when he has gone into Aden, he has withdrawn his resignation, and it's like he thinks it's like a game. But even though this intervention in Yemen is an illegal intervention, and the UN Security Council resolution 2216, it has come after the Saudi intervention, because always the Hadi government always talk about this resolution, and it hasn't mentioned or has actually supported the war on Yemen. It has only mainly on the blockade that the Saudi to ban weapons to come into Yemen, but the Saudi has used this blockade to stop food and medicine coming into Yemen. And Mr. Yemeni, when he talk about landmines, of course it is as Amnesty International, of course it is a crime to put landmine in cities and villages, but in many other areas, like in the coastal line of Yemen or near Bab al-Mandab, those are battleground. So when you have an international intervention, Saudi-backed led coalition intervention in Yemen, of course the Houthi and the Yemeni army supporting the Houthi will try to use every mean to stop this attack.
You think that's okay?
Stop the intervention in the country.
So you think that's okay to use landmines?
Use it in cities. I mean, every country, I mean, that's why they have made those landmines.
I have the Human Rights Watch report in front of me, right? And they go on, they say the Houthi Saleh forces' use of banned anti-personnel landmines in Yemen has caused numerous civilian casualties and hindered the safe return of civilians displaced by fighting. They go on and they list all the governorates, they list 6 of them, and they say these mines have killed and maimed hundreds of civilians and disrupted civilian life in affected areas. So I'll grant it to you that the Saudi-led coalition has caused civilian casualties. Many people have died. Hundreds of civilians, if not thousands of civilians, have been killed by the Saudi-led coalition, but the Houthis are also killing civilians. Will you accept that?
I mean, of course, me personally, I'm not denying that all party of this war has committed crimes. And before you read to me the Human Rights Watch report, I said that it's illegal to use anti-personnel landmine.
One of the first things that they seem to want to do is to take Hudaydah. They're very keen to take Hudaydah. Is that going to be a bloodbath?
I mean, of course it will be, because Hudaydah is one of the largest port city in Yemen and is the only lifeline for over 70% of Yemeni population. They complain and they said that the Houthi are using it to smuggle weapons, and I don't know what kind of blockade they have on Yemen. Have this blockade for 2 years.
They say the weapons are coming through. They say
coming into Yemen.
Sure, they say the weapons are coming from Iran to the Houthis in Yemen. So just like you say, the Saudi-led coalition is an international coalition of non-Yemenis, they're saying the Houthis are getting all their weapons from Iran, and that's why they want to stop them.
How come through 2 years of blockade, of tight blockade, they haven't got any proof of Iranian weapons coming into Yemen?
Okay.
So this is just, I mean, an excuse to extend the pressure on Yemeni people.
Okay, fair point. Hussein, it's good to get your perspective. Thanks so much, Hussein Al-Bukhaiti, joining us there from Sana'a. And that's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.